by Gary Swant, who is the author of a really great book, which you can purchase back there if you would like. I have already purchased his book and read most of it. It's called My Montana Birds, and it's kind of like a conglomeration of Bird of the Month articles. Basically, he's an author for 4 newspapers, and I think that these articles have been in a lot of those. Gary is co-founder of GoBird Montana, which offers bird walks and guided tours and field research for Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and the Montana Department of Environmental Quality. And Gary is speaking to us tonight about birding the 7 continents.
Thank you for allowing me to come tonight. I appreciate you all coming out. I know personally that once I have dinner, it takes a stick of dynamite to get me out of the house most nights. But I do want to explain to you a little bit. GoBird Montana was started in about 2005. And the major work that we're doing right now is at the Berkeley Pit in Butte. In 2016, there was a major catastrophe. There were about, well, we really don't know, maybe 25 to 30,000 white geese died. And we have been working on that since 2016, and it's been a great research project because the first day we met with Atlantic Ridgefield, I wanted to ask the question that's most important. How much budget do we have? And they said, solve the problem. And we have. And last year there were 15,400 birds that landed in the pit. 35 died. We were able to get all the rest of them off the pit and in a healthy condition. So if you someday would like to have me come and make a presentation on what we do in the pit, I'd be glad to do that, because it is a fascinating thing, and we have spent a great deal of money trying to figure out how to make that work. Anyway, what I want to talk to you tonight, and then the other company that I have is I do these writings for 4 papers right now. It varies from 5 to 6 papers depending on subscription levels, but I write under the name Bird Squawk. And the bird book that I do have back there, most of those articles were in magazines or in newspapers, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Anyway, birding the 7 continents. I started birding seriously when I retired in 1993, and I set a goal then of trying to do a lot of things, which I'll talk to you about in just a second. But in 40 years of birding, I could tell you stories until midnight. And I don't know what my time frame is, but we won't be here till midnight. Although if you want to be, we can do that. Anyway, I wanted to introduce to you one of the birds that was one of the first rare birds that I ever found. And that was the long-tailed ground roller. And it's only found on 5 hectares of the Earth's surface, which is only found in about 2.5 acres. And we were in Madagascar at the time. We flew out of Madagascar about 3 hours north of Antananarivo, which is the capital. There we got in a Land Rover and we drove for a couple hours. And then after that, we got in an ox cart and we got as far as we could go in the ox cart. And then we had to walk. And we finally got to the headquarters of this little park that's trying to protect this bird. And there were 5 guides sitting on a bench. And no one else had showed up that day. It was about noon by the time we got there. So I went to pick a guide, and guides were $5 a day, and which was 5 times the average wage in Madagascar. So it's a good wage. And they said, hey, nobody else is coming today. Can we all go and split the $5? I said, sure. So they went out and found this bird for me. And it's a really interesting bird. And It's in the spiny desert of Madagascar, very hot, very dry. And according to eBird, only 369 people have ever seen this species in the world. So that was the first rare bird that I had ever gotten. And that kind of seduced me into, hey, we could do some really neat stuff here. So why is this not working?
Oh,
Nope.
back up one more.
Back one.
It's a
Okay.
little,
Is
yeah.
there a little delay?
There's a little bit of a delay, it seems.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in 1993, I set some birding goals. In Montana, there's 446 species. Currently, there was only 427 when I set these goals. And I decided I wanted to try to get 350 species. I'm now at 382. I am first place in Montana with the total number of birds ever seen. And only 48 people in Montana, again, according to eBird, have ever seen more than 300 birds. Is there anybody here who's seen more than 300 birds in Montana? Okay, in 2007, no one had ever seen 300. And I thought, well, I'm going to try to see if I can do that. And I actually got to 300 on the 4th of July in Glacier Park. And then I said to my wife, well, what should I do? And she says, well, don't ask me, you want to keep going. And so I ended the year with 327. And that record stood until last year, until some young punk beat me. And he ended up with 334. So I was really pleased to see that happen. Another goal that I had was to bird all 56 counties in Montana. I accomplished that in August of 2021. According to eBird, there's only 9 people who have birded all 56 counties. And I just like to set goals because that gives you something to live for. In the United States, there's 1,137 species. I set a goal of 600, and I have 685 as of September of this year. In the world, there's 10,624 species, and those numbers bounce back and forth depending on who you want to talk to. And I set a goal of seeing 2,500. I thought that was about as much money as I had, because it does cost a lot of money to run around the world doing this. And I'm currently at 25,400 birds. And I wanted to bird on 7 continents, and I did that in January of 2021, and then COVID hit in about February, and birding shut down. And then I wanted to write a book about my Montana birding experiences, and that book contains 30 years of photographing birds, and it took me 2 years of writing, and I completed that in 2022. So I'm just about out of goals, which means I may be about out of life. I don't know whether that's true or not. So in world birding, I have 2543, North America, I've got 935, South America 552. The bold is how many birds are there, and then the countries I birded there. Antarctica 32, doesn't sound like very many, and that was a really expensive trip, about $15,000 to see 32 birds. And Africa 661, Europe 173, Asia 175, and Australia 299. And then ABA has its own set of regions of the world. They have the Western Hemisphere, the North American, Central America, South America, West Indies, USA, Lower 48, ABA area, ABA Continental, AOU, Eastern Hemisphere, Africa, Southern Africa, Asia, Eurasia, Europe, Australia, territories, Western Palearctic, South Polar, Indian and Pacific Oceans. And I've been to all of those. And I have not been to the Atlantic Arctic Ocean. I had a trip planned and then COVID hit, and I didn't go. And maybe I don't want to go because then all my goals would be reached. And then what do? You know, so people are always asking me, what is your most favorite bird? Well, this is it. The helmet vanga of Madagascar. It was a 4-day trip to find this bird. I saw it for 15 seconds. The travel was very difficult to the site. It was seen on the last day. The first day of the trip, we hired this guy who absolutely knew where the bird was. And as we were paddling across this lake, I said to him, by the way, what's my chance of seeing this bird? Because it's pretty rare. 90%. I said, great. Second day, I said, well, we're into the second day. What's the chance of seeing this bird? 50%. Third day, 25%. Fourth day, he said, well, I hope we see it. And we got way up on this mountain, and these mountains were steep, they were jungle-like. It was a wet forest, hardwood rainforest, and all of a sudden we heard the bird call. We raced to the top of the mountain, and we heard the bird call at the bottom of the mountain. So we went back down, we got a 15-second look, and the guide turns at me and said, see, 90%. So there are 500,000 eBirders. They have imported 773 million records at the time that I put this together a couple of months ago, and only 238 people have ever seen this bird. So it's just fun to find those rare birds. And my grandson, who's co-partnered with me in GoBird Montana, I started teaching him how to bird when he was 4, has really gotten into it. He's 30 now. And he has two kids, and he named the first one Talus, which is the genus for this bird. And he named the second one Avila, which is the Latin word for bird. So he's into birds as well. What's the ugliest bird you've ever seen? Well, this is probably it. The ground hornbill. And they're all over most of Africa. And there's a lot of hornbills in Africa that are nice looking, but this one is not particularly beautiful. I have used Nikon strictly to take all these pictures. I started with a D100, then I went to a D300, and then I currently use the D750. I have 2 lenses that I use, a 28 to 30 millimeter f4 and a 200 to 500 millimeter f6. You know anything about cameras? I use ASS auto because you're going in and out of the brush. And the camera will change that ASA number for you. I use 1/2000th of a second because I'm hand holding it, and then I let the camera adjust the f-stop. So the camera is adjusting the ASA and the f-stop. And these are some of my favorite North American birds. I have only been able to photograph a Dunlin in breeding plumage twice. Anybody see with this bird in breeding plumage before?
Yeah.
It's just a beautiful bird. It looks like it got into pollution. In fact, I found one time that I thought was, and it ended up he had oil all over his breast. And then I like the American bird. I mean, it's such a unique passerine because it goes under the water and feeds on insects under the water. And then the California condor is a bird I just added to my list a year ago. You can see this is a numbered bird, but according to ABA, you can't count it. And that's just a really interesting vulture. Slow. There we go. Other favorite North American birds, the vermilion flycatcher. I've actually seen this bird in Montana. There's only a few records of it, but every time I see that bird, it just jumps out at you. And this bird was in the Bitterroot Valley for a number of months during one winter, and it stuck out so much that a hawk came and got it while we were watching it. The great gray owl, a lot of people have never seen a great gray owl. We do guided bird tours, and this is one bird that a lot of people request that we try to find for them. We can find that bird about half the time, and we work at finding them at Georgetown Lake. That's probably the best place in the state because they're used to being around people. And then I like the brown creeper because it's got a feeding habit that's so strange. You know, it goes around the tree upside down. And the other thing I like about it is I can't hear it. When it calls, here's what I hear. And there is a joke out there that says, when you have time to go birding, you can't hear or see anymore. And that's really kind of true. And, I have hearing aids now that do help, but they're not perfect by any means. Favorite South American birds, the dark-backed wood quail is a bird that loves to eat bananas. And, what was unique about birding in South America was all these farmers, found out, just, excuse me for a second. My body sheet has changed. The dark-backed wood quail feeds on those, but these farmers have learned that there's a bunch of crazy Americans who will pay money to go to a farm and look at birds. So a lot of these South American farmers are also putting up feeding stations. And consequently, they make a little extra income and we get to see the birds. The other bird that I really enjoyed seeing were all of the ground finches that Darwin based his theories on. And then the oilbird is a nocturnal bird that stays inside of a cave. And the natives used to kill this bird all the time and actually rendered the oil from the bird, which is illegal now. But this guy discovered he had a cave with these on his property, and he put a barred gate across the front of the cave, and then you pay $5 to move it back there. And that's great, because they are developing a conservation attitude. When we were in Ecuador, you can't not be amazed at a sword-billed hummingbird with a 6-inch bill. Just an amazing bird. And then if you know anything about the bowerbirds, they're just really cool because they attract a female by making a grass bower, and then they place little ornaments and colored rocks and bits of food and stuff to attract the female to come into the bower and then mate. And it's just really cool to watch that. And then I like all the birds that have these really interesting beaks on them. And this is the crimson rumped toucannon. Now, I do have a disclaimer here. Somebody else put together a different list, right? This list is ones I photographed, that helps, and they're cool birds. Other South American birds that I really enjoyed, it was a trunculated caracara. You only find those above 9,000 feet in prairies. And then the common puto looks like he's an extension of a dead tree. And he's sort of in nightjar family. They're nocturnal. They fly at night and catch insects. And the Andean cock of the rock, everybody's heard of cock of the rock, really difficult to photograph because they're so bright red that it just doesn't show up well in a picture. But we also found one on the nest, which was cool. And then I like the sunbird because if you know anything about grebes, like the redneck grebe, this is what the redneck grebe chick looks like. They have this striped neck on it. Anybody ever seen that? But in South America, that's the sunbird. They're very difficult to find. And then the pale mandibled Cara, I don't know who, but it's Eric Cara, has got the, he's a fruit eater. I mean, who wouldn't like that on your list? And then the great frigate bird, we were on a small island off of Galapagos, and we were there during the breeding season. And this is a male who's filling his guttural sac and then calling for a female. When I went to Antarctica, of course, the big deal is penguins. And the penguin that's most common is the Adela. I actually walked among colonies of 250 to 500,000 birds. And they warn you, you have to be careful how you go to Antarctica. You can go on a ship where you think you're going to Antarctica, but they don't have permits to get off. So there's Antarctica. And you have to get on one where you actually land. But in order to land, you put on these special boots and overalls that are rubber, And then you, stand in and spray Purex on you, because they don't wanna get anything from the boat onto the land. And then you're not supposed to get closer than, 30 feet from these penguins, but penguins are extremely curious, and they just run right up to you. And you go away, I'm gonna get in trouble. So Adela was the most common one that we saw. We did get a chance to see the emperor, which is the rarest one. They told us that, on every trip, got to see those chin strap, and you can see the chin strap there was fairly common. The Gento was everywhere, and the rock hopper, which is a really crazy looking one, was more common than the emperor, but you didn't get to see them too often. But you just have to like these birds. They're so human-like the way they waddle around. The first bird that I saw as we got close to Antarctica was the snowy sheathbill, because it came and landed on our ship. And he's on the railing of the ship there. Snow petrels are just a beautiful pure white bird. The kelp gull was a large gull. If you think gulls are large, this guy's really large. Then the wandering albatross breeds there. And then this is an Antarctic tern, which does not migrate, but I was able to see the Antarctic tern and the Arctic tern in the same vision of my binoculars. So the Arctic tern is one of the longest migration birds in the world. They summer in January in the Arctic, in Antarctica, and then they breed North Alaska. And then I enjoyed this bird because it reminded me of what? What's a shag? Corn. Yeah, corn. My wife didn't go. By the way, I want to introduce my wife to you. Wave or stand up or something. This is my birding partner. She has been on every trip with me except Antarctica. She read the brochure, and the beds had a plank along the side to keep you in the bed. And she said, "No, I don't think so." And then when we went over, we left from Argentina, and it's about a 70-hour trip over to Antarctica. And I was full of adrenaline, and the seas weren't too bad. And it was a great trip going over. Well, if you've ever been on an overseas trip, on the way back, your testosterone level is down, and the excitement's over. But as we came back, we had 70-foot waves.
Oh, God.
And I really got sick. And I don't particularly get sick, but 70 hours of 70-foot waves will do it.
Yeah.
And they were coming clear over the, I don't know what you call it. What do you call it? Bridge. And we actually had to change courses because of the waves, which got me close enough to Chile that I found a couple birds in Chile, and I could check Chile off the list. I had no intention of going there. And the interesting thing, I got 32 of the 80 birds, but 80 birds over a century. Most of those birds are not there most of the time. And like I say, if you divide 32 into about $15,000, it's pretty expensive per bird. And so I stopped on the way back in Argentina and picked up another 250. So that brought the cost per bird down to where it didn't matter. Favorite African birds? My grandson grew up in Madagascar. He spent, 8 years there? Something like that. And this was the first bird that I ever saw in Madagascar, the Malagasy kusro. The problem with birding in Madagascar is 80% of everything you see is endemic. You know what endemic means? Not found anywhere else in the world. So you're concentrating on a bird, and all these other things come by. And it's just hard to concentrate. I had to keep saying to myself, focus, Gary, focus. I don't care if that's a lemur, focus. But I did look at the lemurs. In Africa, shrikes are called thistles. this is the northern fiscal, and if you know anything about shrikes, they impale their catches on spines. This was in the spiny desert, so they have lots of opportunity. Lots of bishop birds in Africa. This just happens to be one of them, the red bishop, and I like it because of the contrast. And then there are a large group of bee eaters, and this is the blue-cheeked bee eater. They're very colorful. And then the hammerkop is a really strange-looking bird. And they build a nest high in a tree year after year after year after year. And when it gets to be about 3 tons, it falls out of the tree. And then they go somewhere else and start again. And then the saddle-backed stork, pretty hard not to like that bird. And this is the most beautiful crane I've ever seen, the gray-crowned crane. Isn't that a beautiful bird? Some more. I was attracted to this one because I've seen the American spoonbill. And, you know, it's interesting as you travel around the world, if there's a similar niche, you'll find a bird that's similar in its morphology in around the world. And sometimes they've been called the same birds and then later on they split them. You know, we're not crazy about starlings, but Africa has 35 or 36 different starlings. And, you know, that's a beautiful bird. And then the African fish eagle looks somewhat like our eagles here. This was one that I was really excited to find, the African hoopoe. And the African hoopoe, it summers in Africa and then winters in Europe, and now they've split those. So I picked up another bird without ever leaving home. And I would encourage you to keep a life list. Why? Well, it gets you out to see if you can add to that life list. And I mean, I can't imagine birding without a life list, but it's your list. You can do with it what you want. But for me, it gets me out. Now, this is the pintail white-eye, and is a common bird in Africa in the non-breeding season. These drop off. My grandson and I went to California. I'm kind of done birding overseas because I'm 78 years old and running down the corridor because the plane is late to the next corridor is no longer fun. And 11-hour flights from Amsterdam into Africa are no longer fun. But boy, they were fun for a long time, you know. But anyway, we went to California and we found a pintail white-eye in California. And of course, it was a cage bird that had escaped, and it had escaped long enough ago that they found evidence of breeding in ABA. Said you could count it. There are no hummingbirds in Africa, but the bird that's in a similar habitat are the sunbirds, and this particular one is the eastern double-collared sunbird. Asian birds, you get birds that, you know, come in from other parts of the world, but the European goldfinch has just got a great combination of coloration. The sand partridge, what does it kind of look like?
Tucker.
The gray partridge of North America. And I kind of like those birds that do similar thing. And then the knob-billed duck, that's a breeding male. That's kind of interesting. The spur-winged lapwing is a shorebird. He stands about this tall, and that's really interesting. And then the white speculated bulbul just has a lot of great coloring, and the yellow on the vent is just interesting to me. Other ones, here's a Palestinian sunbird that I got in Israel. Here's another green bee eater. And these bee eaters are actually bee eaters. Africans follow these birds and they lead them to where the honey's in the trees, and they find them. A black redstart is a pretty common bird in Africa, and just a gorgeous little bird. I like vultures. Africa has a lot of different vultures, but this was an Egyptian vulture, and that was the only time I ever saw one. And then the white-throated kingfisher, you know, we think of kingfishers here in North America as being associated with riverbanks and stuff. But Africa has a lot of forest kingbirds. European birds, this is the black-winged stilt. Of course, we have in our country the what? The black-necked stilt. But you can see common habitat, the birds look pretty much the same. Only this one's got a white neck, this has got a black. And now there's one that I got that I didn't leave home. They split it after I got home. That's the Eurasian cuckoo. I really like cuckoos. And I've seen both North American cuckoos. What are they? Yellow-billed and black-billed. I've seen both of them in Montana. And they think there's only 3 pair of yellow-billed cuckoos west of the Mississippi. So we thought that was great. We saw that bird in Missoula. And in fact, my grandson ran into it. Whoops. My grandson ran into it. What am I doing? My grandson ran into this yellow-billed cuckoo. And he called me up and said, Grandpa, are there yellow-billed cuckoos in Montana? And I says, are you sure you saw one? Yeah. I said, I'll be there in 50 minutes. I live 70 miles from Missoula. And I was able to see it only once. And then the Eurasian jackdaw has that same niche as the crow. And then when I went to Europe, this was called the black-billed magpie, and then later on, they changed it to the Eurasian magpie. And you know, a lot of this stuff is happening because of genetics. It would be very difficult for you to distinguish the difference if you weren't geographically in a different place. And we were talking before, how many of you are familiar with the red crossbill? They are seriously looking at splitting that into 18 different species. And, you know, it may be genetically, but it would be, you know, almost impossible to do that. How many people think the ring-necked duck is inappropriately named? I do. I want to call it the ring what? Billed duck. But they named it with one in their hand. And you know, that kind of stuff is just interesting. Great tits, they're what? Like our chickadees. The ring ouzel is a dipper. How many remember that the American dipper used to be called the ouzel? You go back far enough? Yeah. And then the spotless starling, obviously. European robin. The American robin, when our pioneers came to America, they were familiar with the European robin, and that's how we got the American robin. Now that doesn't, this bird is not a thrush, but, and the yellow wagtail is all over. And then the brambling, I'm kind of irritated with this bird. Because there was a brambling in Great Falls a year ago. Anybody remember that? One showed up in somebody's backyard, and they were enough of a birder that they realized it was a brambling. Boy, Laura and I jumped in the car and we got to Great Falls, and it had been seen that morning, and we were the first ones not to get it. And that's what birding is like. You just can't guarantee that you're always going to get the bird. Australia is a wonderful place to bird. I just thought this was a really neat red-capped plover. You guys are familiar with plovers. And it's got that plover look, right? With the red cap. And Australia's got a lot of, I think it's one, but Australia's got a lot of birds that look like they're cage birds. The crimson rosella and the sulfur-crested cockatoo. You know, they're just everywhere. But the Egyptian goose was interesting to me because of the shield that it has right here. And then the tawny frogmouth. Don't you love some of these birds? It's kind of one of those nocturnal birds that has these whiskers right here. They fly at night and feed on insects. And the mallee fowl is really interesting not only was I able to get a picture of the malleefowl, but this is a malleefowl nest. And how they incubate their eggs is they lay the eggs on the ground and then they pour on top of that all of these leaves that decompose and they put the heat into the eggs. And the bird comes along once a day and digs into that pile of leaves and vegetation and checks the temperature. And if it's too cold, he piles on more leaves. If it's too hot, he takes some leaves off. It's very interesting. Back in Kookaburra, it's just a great, fun bird. I don't know if I can pull this off or not. I was fooling with it earlier. When you try to do this great stuff, you don't know what happens. Really, we got to get that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they actually are that loud. Okay, the Rufous Whistler, I just like the way that bird looked. The spotted peridottal is just an interesting bird, and I noticed that a lot of trips to Australia show this bird on their advertising. And then the eastern whipbird, I won't try to find it because it takes too much time, but it goes by at about 90 decibels. And just to, just pay attention to that one. And then this bird, half the size of a chickadee, little tiny thing. And that's a Tasmanian thornbill. We found that in Tasmania. And the guide that we had, the guide company, used that picture on their brochures because they said that's about as good a picture as you can get.
Here we go.
Yeah, Montana, favorite birds, snow bunting and the hornlark. I like those because the snow bunting is a winter bird in Montana. And then the hornlark is here year round, but you may not be aware of this. The birds, the hornlarks that are here in the summertime are not the hornlarks that are here in the winter. The ones that are here in the summertime move south, and the ones from the north move into Montana. So it's this kind of movement. And the ones that breed in the northern hemisphere above us have a white throat rather than a yellow throat. And this is a bird that I've seen about 6 times. But most people have never seen them. How many people here have seen a black scotia? Few of you, huh? Okay. We find them at Silver Lake and at the Arco Ponds at Warm Springs. And that, let me just stop and say this to you. One of the things that we do, I work very closely with Atlantic Richfield. I'm not an employee of Atlantic Richfield. I contract with them. And one of the things my grandson and I contract with is to do bird walks at the Warm Springs Ponds. The Warm Springs Ponds are a chemical treatment facility. That's what they were put in for because of the 1908 flood. And the water comes in, they treat it with calcium. There's 6,400 acres of water there. It's a huge treatment plant. Takes 30 days for the water to come out. The water meets all state standards except one, and that's arsenic. And they can't understand that because the arsenic level coming in is less than the arsenic level coming out. And we think it has something to do with detergents. And these modern sewage plants do not treat detergents very well. But that's the biggest problem there. But anyway, we went to them and said, you have a great story to tell here. And this is a major staging area for waterfowl and shorebirds. In the fall, second week of October is the biggest staging month of the year. and we will count 45,000 birds. And then in the spring, the staging, the best staging month, a week, is about the third week of May, and we'll count about 27,000. Now, there's 446 birds in Montana, and we have, over the years, identified 254 of those in that 6,400 acres. And you are welcome to go and walk anywhere you want out there or ride a bicycle. The problem is it's very confusing because of the way they have it set up. So we went to Atlantic Richfield and said, how about sponsoring bird walks? So we have 4 bird walks in the spring and 3 in the fall. And I intend on letting the people here know when those walks are. We limit the walks to 25 people. And we could actually reserve one of those walks just for this club. And you would find it just a lot of fun. And it's a great place to bicycle because all the dikes are level. And there are 13 ponds in the complex with dikes around all of them that you can bird. And it's just a great place to bird. And then the long-tailed duck is another one that we've seen there a lot, as well as on Silver Lake. And then our valley is interesting. Why does this do it? It's got to be my fault. There we go. The gyrfalcon, we typically have gyrfalcons in the wintertime in our valley. And in fact, if you go into the literature, our valley has more gyrfalcons than any other valley in the United States on Christmas bird counts. But I think it was that a pair came there every year. And then the blue-gray gnatcatcher is just a tiny little bird. The only place I've ever seen it is Bear Canyon, south of Billings. Or I saw it once at Lewis and Clark Caverns, which has a similar habitat. And then the gray flycatcher is one that we get south of Dillon. And these two here are 2 birds that people outside the state of Montana really want to pay you to find for them. What's the state bird of Montana? Meadowlark. Did you know this, the actual bird should be the thick-billed longspur? Do you know what? Do you know what the thick-billed longspur is? It's a little sparrow. Do you know why that should be our state bird? Because 67% of the entire breeding population breeds in Montana. Why did we make the meadowlark our state bird? It was in all 56 counties. Now, if you've never heard of a thick-billed longspur, what did they used to be called? Macallans. Okay. So that would be a good project for your club. Go to the legislature and they'd go, what? Yeah. Herman's gull. It's only been recorded in Montana twice. Once was in Polson. Laura and I went to church one Sunday and we saw that it was there at Polson. So we went from church to Polson and right there in the dock. We got it and turned around, went home, and that was an easy life bird in Montana in about 6 hours. I like the common nighthawk. I like those nocturnal birds that feed on insects. Yeah, common nighthawk. And then the black-crowned night heron is really not found very often west of the Continental Divide. But I was the first person to ever document breeding of that bird west of the Continental Divide, and that was at Warm Springs. And we had a breeding pair there for about 5 years. The last couple of years, we've had adults visit the area, but no breeding. I suspect the original 2 died. We also get Pacific loons, which are quite rare in Montana, but we get those at Warm Springs. That's just an interesting pose of a Pacific loon. The boreal owl is a difficult owl to find. And we, as a family, always get together at Christmas with all of our family and we rent a cabin. And we were at this cabin and we looked out the window and this boreal owl was looking in the window. That's how we got that one. And then the Lapland longspur, a lot of people haven't seen that. You can see here on this bird, the longspur. And they're very common in the Upper Clark Fork. If you don't have this one on your list, get a hold of us and we'll tell you where they're at in the wintertime. I do have a great partner, except for Antarctica. And this is a picture of us in the Galapagos Islands. This is in Kruger Park in South Africa. This is in Belize. This is on the Pribilof Islands. You guys know where the Pribilof Islands are? Close to Russia, maybe 100 miles from Russia out there off the Aleutians. And then this one here, this is Mount Kenya in the background. And I always tell people, I've climbed Mount Kenya. Did you know that? Kilimanjaro, excuse me. It's in Kenya, Kilimanjaro. So I always tell people I've climbed that because there's a gate there and you can step across the gate and you're on the trail. And that's about as far as I got. It's legitimate climb, not too far. So I had a guide there in Africa and I said to him, have you ever climbed Mount Kilimanjaro? No birds. But it's not technical, it's just a long walk. So what were the best places I've birded? Yeah, this is my list, not yours. Madagascar is by far the best place I've ever birded because it's 80% endemics. And there's 311 species there. And actually I'm listed at about number 30 in Madagascar. South Africa, Kruger National Park is a wonderful park to bird. Australia, Tasmania, is just the scenery in that country is wonderful and the people are gracious. If you want to go to South America, Ecuador has 1,650 species. Just a wonderful place to bird. People are friendly and you're birding at 8, 9, 10,000 feet in a cloud forest. And it's just wonderful birding. And then Belize, if you've never done any international birding, I would suggest you go to Belize because there's 618 species. It's not very far away. It's not very expensive. The language is English, and so is the currency. So you don't have all of those issues that you sometimes face in other countries. Montana counties, as I said before, there's 446. These are the counties that I think are the best to bird. Sheridan County, where's that? The northeast corner. And I have 198 birds there. 20 of the birds that I have in Sheridan County, I've never seen anywhere else. Why? It's right on the edge of the Central Flyway. And the birds will spill in there if the weather blesses you. Deer Lodge County, now that's not the county I live in. I live in Deer Lodge, but Deer Lodge County is not Deer Lodge, it's Anaconda. But I have personally 253 birds there. I love the Flathead, 203. And of course, I love the Flathead in part because of Glacier Park. But I am to the point where I got to find some place to bird besides Glacier Park. Anybody else feel that way? We were up there today and it's still crowded. You know, and it's just, we're loving it to death. Madison County, I really like that. I have 207. Madison County includes the Ennis area and Ennis Lake, which is really good birding. Phillips County is Malta. There's several WMAs and National Wildlife Refuges there. And then Yellowstone County, Billings gets some really interesting birds. In the United States, these are the states I like. California with 681 birds, Texas with 660, Florida with 556, Arizona with 551. There's a county in Arizona called Chiricahua County. That county has more birds than any other county in the United States. And it's just a whole bunch of fun to bird that area. And then Montana with 446. I mentioned earlier that I wrote a book called My Montana Birds. It's 276 pages. There's articles on 175 species. The problem with writing a book, this book's a year old, and I've already written 15 articles that aren't in the book. You know, you got to stop someplace. There's additional articles on birding ethics resources, how we name birds. I have a section in there on Montana birding areas, hotspots. I have a section on eBird and how to really use eBird, how to get started, caring for binoculars and scopes. Let me tell you this, if you don't know it, how many of you end up with dirty binoculars? If you're not careful, you can ruin binoculars really quickly by using most of the things you think you can clean binoculars with. What happens? High quality binoculars have a lot of coatings on the lenses, and most of those materials that you clean with take the coatings off. And you've just gone from a $3,200 pair of Swarovskis down to a $600 pair of something. What is the best thing to clean binoculars with, which will not hurt the coatings, is simple green. Just spray the whole thing with simple green and wipe it off. But if you use the wrong material, you'll really ruin a good pair of binoculars. There's a Montana bird list that is current on there. And then I read all of the Lewis and Clark journals, and I came up with a list of the birds that Lewis and Clark saw when they came to Montana. It's not nearly as big as you think it would be, but their purpose was not to just find birds. And when you're in ice water up to your neck pulling a boat, it's a little hard to bird. And then there's a glossary of technical terms, and I put in there an alphabetical and taxonomic index. And people are always saying to me, why can't we just do the birds alphabetical? Well, I said, well, if you do that, you'll never learn the relationship between birds. But it makes sense to people that birds ought to be alphabetical, but it does not make any sense at all taxonomically. And if you'd like to buy a copy tonight, I'd love to sign a copy for you. There's a little restaurant that I drive by all the time down in Ennis, and there's a sign out front of the restaurant that says, if you don't stop, we'll both starve. That's not quite true about you buying a book, but I'd love to sell you a book. A couple of you here already have it. It's a fun gift for somebody that might just be getting started. It's a fun Christmas or birthday gift, and it's kind of a coffee table book. You can read about a book, a bird, and then think about it. And a couple of days later, go back and read about another one. Any questions before we quit? You're a great audience. You laughed when you were supposed to, and I really enjoyed speaking to you. Any questions? Wow.
What'd you see today on Glacier?
Pardon?
What kind of birds did you see?
Well, there wasn't much up there. I walked the boardwalk. I saw a fox sparrow and a raven and two gray crown rosy finches. That's it. There wasn't much up there. Laura? Yeah, the way this thing was advertised was it was advertised that I went to 7 continents in 2022, and I thought that's interesting. It didn't take me 1 year, it took me 30. One rare bird we did see just recently at Georgetown Lake. I didn't actually see it, but a guy called me and said, I got a little sparrow-like bird up here with a green back. And the green back just comes down a short ways. And he sent me a picture of him. I said, man, I have never seen that bird. And I know Montana birds. And I got a hold of my grandson and we worked on it. And we finally decided it was a juvenile painted bunting. And it was the second sighting in Montana. And of course I went up there and wasn't there that day. But we had great photographs of it. And then the Rare Bird Committee, Jeff Marks, if you know him, wrote me yesterday, and we accepted your identification. Yes. Oh yeah. New birders find a lot of rare birds. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I'll go, yeah. Sure list. So this guy found a green heron in Powell County. And I went, yeah, you know, there's no green herons in Powell County. So my grandson called me from Butte and said, did you go see the green heron? And I said, that's a waste of time. There's no green heron in Powell County. He said, he's got pictures on the internet. So I went and looked and, oh my gosh, it was. And so I drove out maybe 3/4 of a mile from my home. And there's a green heron. And I mean, that was bird number 381. I added a Montana life bird, 3/4 of a mile from my house that I didn't believe was there. And I'm just lucky my arrogance almost cost me a bird, you know, and so don't get cocky about this stuff. Cause I talk to people who say, oh yeah, I know every bird and where they're at. You don't, because the birds don't read the same book you do. Okay.
Now, as it turns out, it was an out-of-state birder visiting somebody in our town. He knew the bird.
Yeah, you know, it makes you wonder how many rare birds are in the state that no birder sees. I mean, there's no way to know the answer to that, but there's got to be lots of.
Why you go out?
Yeah. You know, one time there was a Carolina chickadee down at Papel, and it landed in the yard of a birder.
Carolina Wren, wasn't it?
Carolina wren, yeah, Carolina wren. And it landed in the yard of a birder, and then we went and saw that. But you know, what's the chances? It could land in 70 yards, and those 70 people wouldn't even care about it. Any other questions before we wrap it up? I love birding. It's a passion, and it gets me out. My wife and I love to go together. My grandson and I really love to go together. When we go, my wife doesn't go because she gets tired of us talking about birds. And when my grandson was 4 and 5 years old, the way I got him interested was saying, "Okay, Caleb, let's talk about covids." And I would name one, and he would name one, and I would name one, and he would name one, until we ran through all of them. Okay, let's talk about the hawks. I'd name one, he'd name one, back and forth and back and forth. And you know, if you start them young and tell them to protect their ears, you know, and now he has a great job working for me. And in a year and a half, I'm going to turn the company over to him because I've decided to retire at 80. That's long enough. And he'll do a very competent job of continuing to run the company. But he started at 4. We took him to a convention in Texas when he was 7, and these speakers would be up front speaking. And then afterwards, a 7-year-old kid would come up and say, "Well, now, yeah, I heard you say this, but you know, this is my slant on that." You know, and it was just great seeing the kid do it. And he's just stayed interested. Well, I won't stretch this out any further. If you would like to purchase a book, we'd love to sell you one. And should I turn it back to you?
Okay.